The so-called 1956 Battle of Palmdale was not a proud moment for the US military. After a Grumman F6F5K Hellcat drone went rogue, two F-89 Scorpion jets started a calamitous pursuit to destroy it. These state-of-the-art interceptors were armed with 208 rockets and carried cutting-edge military targeting technology. Yet even though their foe couldn't fight back, the pilots of the jets couldn't take the drone down. The Hellcat flew away from them without a scratch. In their attempt to destroy the drone, they did, however, leave a path of destruction through Palmdale, California. By sheer luck, no lives were lost during the incident, but it took 500 firefighters to deal with the aftermath of the chase. The Grumman. The Grumman Hellcat was considered one of the most powerful and feared naval aircraft during its heyday. It was the dominant fighter during the second half of the Pacific War, and it's credited with having the highest kill versus loss ratio of any American aircraft during World War II. Nicknamed the aluminum tank, the plane brought down over 5,000 Japanese planes, despite often sustaining substantial damage itself. The Hellcat also holds another record, being the most quickly produced aircraft ever. At its peak, the Grumman Company produced up to 644 per month. Although it was sturdy, reliable, and easy to fly, the fighter saw combat for less than 2 years. After the war, some F6F5K Hellcats were turned into radio-controlled target drones for the Naval Reserve Squadrons. They were distinguishable for their bright red, orange, and yellow colors. They were used for testing the effectiveness of surface-to-air missiles that could defend naval assets. In July 1946, 4 F6F5K Hellcats were used during the first nuclear test at Bikini Atoll. They were guided to fly through the blast cloud of the atomic bomb and collect samples. One of them crashed, and the other 3 were retrieved safely. In August 1952, the Guided Missile Unit sent 6 Hellcats, each carrying a 2,000-pound bomb, to attack a bridge and a railway tunnel in North Korea. This was meant as an experiment, and ultimately did little damage to anything other than the drones themselves. Later on, the F6F5Ks were used exclusively for training purposes. The drone eventually left the Navy's inventory in 1961. Nowadays, 5 Hellcat drones fly occasionally as part of different collections in air museums. Another 3 aircraft are under restoration and could soon achieve flight status. Despite the Palmdale incident and other failures, experts agree that the F6F5K Hellcat drones left an important mark on modern air combat. They were used in testing the Sidewinder missile, the air-to-air combat weapon of choice still used extensively today. The Scorpion. The F-89 Scorpion is best remembered for being the first fighter jet to carry the Genie rocket, an air-to-air unguided nuclear missile. However, the weapon was only launched once during a controlled test in the Nevada desert. The first prototype of the F-89 was developed in 1948 by the Northrop Corporation. It was painted black and had a high-mounted tail, which earned it the nickname Scorpion. It eventually became an all-weather fighter interceptor, capable of locating and destroying enemy aircraft during night or day. The plane served in the North American Air Defense Command for over 17 years. The Scorpion went through many modifications and variations. Its definitive version was the F-89D, which could carry up to 4 Hughes Falcon air-to-air guided missiles. It could also carry the aerial rockets nicknamed Mighty Mouse on each wingtip. The primary purpose of the aircraft was to protect the US sky from Soviet bombers. A total of 1,050 Scorpions were produced until they were retired in the late 1980s. The Battle of Palmdale. On the morning of August 16, 1956, an F6F5K lifted off the runway of the Naval Air Station Point Mugu in California. It was painted bright red for it to be visible as a target. On its final mission with the Navy, the drone was supposed to be guided to a missile test area safely above the Pacific Ocean. There, it would be taken down with several new air-to-air missiles that were being developed. But the drone didn't follow the script. Soon after takeoff, it stopped responding to commands. Experts believe that either the ground transmitter or the aircraft receiver broke down. The drone abandoned its course towards the ocean. Instead, it took a southeast turn towards Los Angeles, continually climbing in altitude. The Hellcat had officially become a runaway. The drone was immediately perceived as a danger. It would cause significant damage and possibly the loss of lives if it crashed anywhere in Los Angeles. The Navy decided to call the nearby Oxnard Air Force Base to dispatch the drone, since they didn't have any suitable aircraft available to complete the mission. The Air Force chose to send 2 F-89D Scorpions, armed with 208 unguided air-to-air Mighty Mouse rockets. The drone could easily be destroyed by a missile, as long as they could actually get a hit on it. By the time the Scorpions caught up with the Hellcat, it had already crossed Los Angeles and flew over Antelope Valley, a mostly unpopulated area. It was the perfect opportunity to take down the drone. The pilots attempted to fire the rockets using an automatic computerized fire control, but it failed to launch. It became a comedy of errors. Because the Scorpions carried state-of-the-art radar-assisted targeting, they weren't equipped with traditional gun sights. And since they'd been built to fight formations of Soviet bombers, the aircraft weren't ideal for taking out a small, unpredictable drone. The pilots quickly switched to manual control to fire their unguided rockets, and they were forced to aim by looking up the cockpit canopy. It didn't help that Mighty Mouse rockets were known for being extremely inaccurate after launch. As the Hellcat turned back towards Los Angeles, the situation became more urgent. The pilots had two options: shoot the drone from the back or from its side. They decided to shoot from the side because the drone was continually turning. The pilots also decided to launch 42 rockets at once in a ripple fire pattern, which was usually enough to take down a moving target in most situations. The first pilot completely missed the drone, however, and the second one grazed the fuselage underside. None of the rockets detonated. The Hellcat drone was approaching the town of Newhall when the pilots decided to fire a second round of 32 rockets each. None of them managed to make contact either. The failure forced them to recalibrate their intervalometers, which controlled the intervals at which the missiles were released. By then, the Scorpions were running low on fuel. This meant the pilots had one chance left to achieve their mission. As the drone headed northwest towards Palmdale, they fired their final round of rockets, 30 each. But they were also low on luck. Again, not a single rocket made contact. Even with 208 missiles in their power, they were unable to shoot down the Hellcat. Defeated, the Scorpions headed back to the airbase. The drone kept its path over Palmdale until the engine died from fuel starvation. Eventually, it slowly descended in a spiral, severed 3 electrical cables, and crashed into the Mojave Desert. The remains of the Hellcat were found a little over 8 miles away from Palmdale, in the middle of a desolate area. Unintentional bombing. The 208 Mighty Mouse rockets launched by the Scorpions seemed to have hit everything but the drone. Only 15 of them were found undetonated. The first round of missiles fell on the community of Castaic in northern Los Angeles and started a brush fire that destroyed 150 acres. One rocket fell near Placerita Canyon and started a fire in a park. Others ignited several oil sumps from the Indian Oil Corporation. A colossal disaster almost occurred in Placerita, where fires started 100 yards from the Burmite Powder Corporation's explosives plant. Luckily, firefighters controlled the flames before they reached the plant. The worst damage was in Soledad Canyon, near Mount Gleason, where the rockets burned over 350 acres of rough brush. In total, the Scorpions destroyed over 1,000 acres of wilderness in California. To put the fires out, 500 firefighters had to work for 2 days. No casualties or injuries were recorded, but the missiles came awfully close to several civilians. Edna Carlson and her 6-year-old son were at their house when shrapnel burst through their front window, piercing a wall in a pantry cupboard. Fragments of a rocket also barely missed a visitor sitting in the house of Mr. J.R. Hingle. Larry Kempton and his mother were driving through Palmdale Boulevard when a rocket fell near them. The explosion shattered the windows and destroyed the car's radiator, but the 2 people aboard were unharmed. Over in Placerita Canyon, a Mr. Johns and Mr. Babbitt were eating lunch inside a truck. After the men decided to finish their meal under the shadow of a tree, fragments of a rocket tore through the vehicle, completely destroying it. The chase made it to the LA Times front page headline, which classified the incident as a, quote, unintentional bombing attack. Outraged, LA Supervisor Roger Jessup introduced a resolution to ask Navy officials for the, quote, utmost care in launching any more robot planes into the California sky. Cleanup. 4 days after the incident, the Air Force still hadn't found the remains of 175 rockets. The inhabitants of Los Angeles were warned by the Air Force officials that the missiles were still armed and could detonate at any moment. For several weeks, crews were sent to disarm and detonate the rockets that were unaccounted for. 4 decades later, the spot where the drone fell was revisited by a pair of historians that document military crash sites. To find the place, the men followed the power lines until they came across the repaired wires that the drone tore apart on its way down. Even though the Air Force had cleaned up the site, the historians still discovered bright red metal plates and fragments from camera pods. The remains bore the inspection stamps and serial numbers that proved they belonged to the infamous Hellcat drone. The incident was dubbed the Battle of Palmdale. It was a mockery of the fight between a rogue drone and 2 of the best interceptors of the time. But for aviation archaeologist Peter Merlin, part of the duo that found the remains of the Hellcat, such failures are part of aviation history. As he said to the BBC, quote, "There was a very steep learning curve, so crash sites kind of represent that legacy."